Have you ever wondered why opening up feels so difficult for you, even with people you trust? Why you can listen to other people's problems for hours, yet struggle to say, I'm not okay when it's your turn? A lot of people think this is just personality, but often it's something much deeper than being quiet or private. Today, we're going to explore the quiet traits many people develop when they no longer feel emotionally safe enough to fully open up. 1. Growing up emotionally ignored. People who struggle to open up often learned very early that their emotions were not something others truly made space for. And maybe you tried explaining how you felt as a child only to be dismissed, interrupted, or told you were too sensitive. Maybe nobody intentionally hurt you, but emotional attention was inconsistent, uncomfortable, or missing entirely. Over time, something subtle begins to happen inside you. You stop expressing emotions naturally. You begin studying whether your feelings are acceptable before speaking about them. You soften your pain while explaining it. You hide disappointment behind phrases like, it's fine, or don't worry about it. Most people misunderstand this about you. They think you are naturally reserved. Yes, but often, emotional silence was something you adapted into after repeatedly feeling unseen. You learned that vulnerability can feel embarrassing when nobody responds to it properly. So instead of expecting comfort, you started expecting emotional distance. And eventually, silence feels safer than hoping someone will finally understand you this time. 2. Feeling like a burden. Many people who rarely open up carry one quiet belief underneath everything else. My problems will make people tired of me. So even when something hurts deeply, your instinct is not to reach outward. It is to minimize it before anyone else has to. You may notice yourself doing this in small ways, and you apologize for venting too long. You say, sorry, this probably sounds stupid. You rewrite messages multiple times to sound less emotional. You tell people you are okay because explaining the truth feels heavier than carrying it alone. What makes this painful is that you are often incredibly patient with other people's emotions. You listen carefully. You reassure people. You never see them as weak for struggling. Only yourself. That contradiction usually comes from fear, not logic. Somewhere along the way, you started associating emotional needs with guilt. You became afraid of taking up too much emotional space. Afraid that if people saw how overwhelmed you really felt, they might slowly pull away. So you become emotionally low maintenance, easygoing, independent, but internally, you may be carrying far more than anyone realizes. And after a while, being silently overwhelmed starts feeling more familiar than being emotionally supported. 3. Learning to handle everything alone. A lot of emotionally closed-off people are described as strong, but many of them became strong because they stopped expecting support to truly stay. Maybe asking for help once led to disappointment. Maybe people only showed up temporarily. Maybe vulnerability made you feel exposed instead of comforted. And so you adapted by becoming emotionally self-sufficient. You learned how to calm yourself down privately, how to process pain internally, how to survive difficult periods without letting anyone notice how bad things really felt. From the outside, this can look admirable. You seem composed during stressful situations. You rarely rely on others. You continue functioning even when emotionally exhausted. But there is often another side people never see. You become uncomfortable being emotionally dependent on anyone. Even when trustworthy people enter your life, part of you still expects disappointment eventually. So instead of reaching out when life becomes heavy, you isolate quietly and deal with it alone. You don't realize this, but sometimes emotionally independent people are not avoiding connection because they dislike people. They are avoiding the vulnerability that comes with needing someone emotionally. Because depending on others once felt uncertain, and uncertainty taught you to rely on yourself instead. 4. Struggling to understand emotions. Some people stay quiet because they are hiding emotions. Others stay quiet because they genuinely cannot explain what they are feeling. You may feel emotionally heavy, disconnected, anxious, irritated, or exhausted all at once. But when someone asks what is wrong, your mind suddenly empties. Not because nothing is there, because too much is there. When emotions were never openly discussed growing up, many people never fully learned how to identify them clearly. They became better at suppressing feelings than understanding them. So instead of saying, I feel emotionally overwhelmed and disconnected, you simply say, I'm tired. People often mistake this for emotional coldness. But internally, you may actually feel things very intensely. The problem is not lack of emotion, it is lack of emotional clarity. And that creates a frustrating inner experience. You want people to understand you, but the moment you try to explain yourself, the words suddenly feel incomplete. You worry you will not make sense. And you worry your emotions will sound dramatic or confusing. So silence starts feeling easier than trying to explain feelings you barely understand yourself. Sometimes the quietest people are carrying the most emotionally complicated inner worlds. 5. Getting hurt after opening up. Sometimes people stop opening up because of one experience they never fully recovered from. You trusted someone with a vulnerable part of yourself. Maybe you finally admitted you were struggling. Maybe you talked about something painful you had hidden for a long time. And instead of feeling understood, you felt exposed. Maybe they judged you. Maybe they dismissed your feelings. And maybe they listened at first, then later used your vulnerability against you in an argument or changed the way they treated you afterward. The brain remembers emotional pain very carefully, especially when that pain comes from being emotionally honest. So after enough experiences like this, openness stops feeling safe. You begin filtering yourself automatically. You think carefully before revealing personal emotions. You share small pieces of yourself instead of the deeper truth. Most people never notice this fear because it hides behind normal behavior. You can still laugh, socialize, and hold conversations naturally. But emotionally, there is always a line people cannot cross. And the strange part is that many emotionally guarded people deeply crave closeness. They want connection just as much as anyone else. They simply no longer trust what happens after vulnerability enters the room. So instead of risking emotional disappointment again, they learn how to stay emotionally difficult to reach. 6. Being afraid to look weak. Some people would rather carry pain privately than let anyone see them emotionally struggling. Not because they think emotions are bad, but because vulnerability feels dangerously close to losing control. You may notice this in subtle ways. You laugh while talking about painful experiences. And you quickly change the subject after sharing something personal. You avoid crying in front of people, even people you love. A lot of this begins in environments where weakness did not feel emotionally safe. Maybe vulnerability was mocked growing up. Maybe emotional struggles were treated like inconvenience or immaturity. Maybe you learned that people respect you more when you appear composed, so you became skilled at functioning through pain. Even during emotionally exhausting periods, you still show up. You still respond normally. You still try to appear calm and emotionally managed. And because people mostly see the composed version of you, they assume you are handling things better than you actually are. That becomes the difficult part. The stronger you appear externally, the harder it becomes to admit you are struggling internally. Sometimes emotionally guarded people are not hiding because they have no emotions. They are hiding because they are terrified of being emotionally seen in a vulnerable state they cannot take back. 7. Getting used to staying silent. Eventually, silence stops feeling temporary. It starts feeling like identity. People who rarely open up often become so used to carrying everything internally that emotional isolation begins to feel normal. And you stop expecting people to fully understand you. You stop reaching out automatically when life becomes difficult. And after enough time, silence no longer feels like protection. It just feels familiar. You may tell yourself, this is simply how I am. But often, this version of you was built slowly over time. You adapted to disappointment. You adapted to emotional distance. You adapted to carrying heavy emotions privately because it once felt safer than risking vulnerability. And the difficult part is that this habit can become invisible even to you. You become so good at hiding emotional pain that people stop noticing it completely. Sometimes even you stop noticing how emotionally overwhelmed you really are until exhaustion quietly catches up with you. Not loud exhaustion, quiet exhaustion. The kind that hides behind functioning normally. The kind that still answers messages, goes to work, and smiles during conversations while internally feeling emotionally disconnected from almost everything. And sometimes the saddest part is this. People who carry everything alone for too long often forget what emotional support is supposed to feel like. Some people are not emotionally distant because they feel less deeply. Sometimes they feel everything so deeply that silence became the safest way to protect themselves. And then maybe that silence once helped you survive certain experiences in your life. Maybe it gave you control when emotions felt unsafe, ignored, or misunderstood. But carrying everything alone for too long can slowly become emotionally exhausting. Not because you are weak, but because no one was meant to hold every feeling entirely by themselves forever. And if you saw yourself somewhere in this video, maybe the truth is not that you are bad at opening up. Maybe you simply learned very early that vulnerability felt safer when nobody else could reach it. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.